Varmt välkomna till Expressens monter. Jag heter Karin Olsson och är kulturchef på Expressen. A warm welcome to Masha Gessen.
Thank you.
You're a well-known, prominent Russian-American writer, and you're well-known in Sweden for your books The Man Without a Face, The Unlikely Rise of Vladimir Putin, and the book World Will Break Cement, a book about Pussy Riot. You are kind of a guest of honor here at the book fair, and you have been in Sweden quite a few times, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and you actually wrote a love letter to Sweden recently for the magazine Vi läser. Where does this crush come from? Could you please explain?
So the magazine asked me to write a letter to Sweden. Apparently, this is something that many American writers and possibly writers from other countries have done at the opening of the magazine. And so I walked around for a few days thinking about what I would like to say to Sweden. And I realized, this was after I'd just been to Sweden again, and I realized that what I wanted to say to Sweden is, I love you. And then I thought, well, that's kind of ridiculous, because who loves a country? And you know, when people tell me that they love Russia, foreigners who say that they fall in love with Russia, I think that's kind of an absurd statement to make, because you don't fall in love with a country, you can fall in love with a person or people who live in that country, and then you want to keep going back. But when I thought about it, I thought, well, the people who keep me coming back here are all immigrants. And it's not a coincidence, because this country has a very long and rich tradition of welcoming immigrants and creating homes for them there and allowing them to be fully realized people here, which makes them the kind of people that I can fall in love with. So, and right around that time, I saw a chart of the European countries and the number of refugees per capita that each country was taking, and Sweden was at the top of the chart. And I sort of choked up, and I thought, oh, you know, I'm so proud of my beloved Sweden. And I thought, well, yeah, this is what I should write about. I should write about the fact that I love Sweden for this. This is what Sweden represents to me. A unique European country that has traditionally been open to refugees. And I thought this was probably a good time to write this letter, because I know it's not always easy, and if you have one person saying to you, please keep being yourself because this is what I love you for, maybe that helps.
You're one of Putin's and his regime's harshest critics. And earlier today I thought about walking around this book fair last year, speaking to Russian writers and Russian people spending a lot of time in the country, and I talked to Ukrainian poets, and everybody was so depressed about what was happening, the massive propaganda and the repression from Russia. And a year has passed since. How would you describe the development in Russia at the time? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
I'd say it's probably same but worse, in the sense that I would suspect that if you talk to Russian speakers at the fair today, you would hear much of the same thing, but there are probably a lot fewer Russian speakers at the fair today than there were last year, because the economy is in shambles. It's much less likely that people will travel here for this fair, either writers or publishers. Everybody is struggling, and everybody's struggling both economically and sort of, if I can use this word loosely, spiritually. I'm talking about, you know, right-thinking people who were distressed by, you know, the dissipation of the protests and then the invasion of Ukraine, and who are upset by what I think is the reconstruction of totalitarian mechanisms in Russia in the last 3.5 years. And of course, another thing is that a lot of those people have left. I mean, Russia, even official Russian state statistics authority is reporting the largest outflow of people in decades in the last 2 years.
You are traveling back and forth between Russia, Moscow, and New York. What do your friends in Russia say? Are they getting influenced by this propaganda machinery? Because I've heard people saying even people that used to be open-minded, used to be liberal, have been like infected by this machinery.
I chose my friends very well. But you know what's upsetting is that when I noticed this a few months ago, that when I would ask somebody, "How are you?" they would give me a report on the measures they're taking to ensure that they can leave the country. I mean, that's how the question "How are you?" is now being interpreted among my friends in Moscow. But I want to talk a little bit about what you call the infection rate or what Russians call the Crimea is ours, and it's all one word, right? It's like the answer to everything, and it's the Crimea is ours, a sort of shorthand for a totalitarian mindset. And in a totalitarian society, it is a matter of survival to be able to know what the government wants you to say and to say it at the right moment. Right? And Hannah Arendt wrote about this, and it's one of the most important lines, I think, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, where she explains that a totalitarian regime doesn't force its opinions on its subjects. It robs them of the very ability to form opinions. Right? So you have to understand that when you're looking at Putin's 86% approval ratings and the overwhelming support for the war in Ukraine, that's what you're looking at. But you shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that, they secretly think something else. No. That the ability to think something else is what is taken away from people when they live in a totalitarian society, when they exist in a constant state of low-level dread, and they know they have to sort of catch the emanations that are coming from the Kremlin and reflect them back.
1 year ago, I interviewed the American historic Timothy Snyder in Kiev, and he was very pessimistic, and he warned me as a European. He was claiming that Putin's dream was to undermine the European Union to fulfill his dream about the Eurasian Union. This is a very dystopian view of things. Do you share that? Or?
Well, Tim Snyder is a friend, and he's also a fellow recipient of the Carnegie Millennium Fellowship this year. So Tim got a grant to work on a project called The End of Europe, and I got a grant to work on the project Putin's War Against the West. So
okay. You had something in common.
I think, yes. We actually agree on quite a few things, and I think he's absolutely right. I don't know, the subtle difference in our views is that I don't know that I think that the Eurasian Union is so important as an entity. I think that there's a less well-defined idea, which is this idea of a traditional value civilization, and that Russia has a civilizational mission. But yes, absolutely. It is pursuing its civilizational mission, or Putin is pursuing its civilizational mission, by undermining European values and European structures in a very, very directed manner. Including by sponsoring and supporting and inspiring the European far right.
Yeah. That is a very interesting topic, by the way, these far-right populist parties that often supports the Russian strategies. Could you please tell us some more about those connections? How are they directly meeting each other, or is it more subtle, the influence?
The connections are fairly difficult to document. What I know has been shown beyond the shadow of a doubt is Russia's sponsorship of Marine Le Pen's party in France. I have been able to document some of Russia's activities in Finland, where you have the True Finns, or what used to be known as the True Finns, basically spouting and this is a classic example of the kind of rhetoric that Russia wants to see in Europe, right? Where on the one hand, its traditional values, it's anti-gay, it's anti-European political correctness, and on the other hand, it's very much anti-European structures, right? It's so their rhetoric is, look, Finland had more independence when it was part of the Russian Empire. It had its own currency. It had its own, and made its own laws. It didn't have to follow policies that were forced upon it by Europe. So in the implied messages, Finland would be better off leaving the European Union and seeking closer ties with Russia because it could be more itself. And it's this idea of the sort of the primate, the primal self that can be brought out. That actually, now you've mentioned Tim Snyder, but in his new book Black Earth, he talks about Hitler's idea of the primal self of nations. That is the primal self of races, rather, and these people are talking about the primal self of nations. But the parallels are really eerie, and I was just reading Tim's book and being sort of freaked out by that.
Yeah. But does Russia have the muscles to fulfill this undermining of the European values and structures? Economically, it's pretty shaky, isn't it? Or
economically, it's pretty shaky, which makes it more aggressive and possibly more dangerous. I don't know that you need a lot of muscle to undermine something that is not well articulated or well protected. I think that Europe has not responded to this threat in an adequate manner. I think that Europe has done a lot of the right things, but for the wrong reasons. But one thing that hasn't been done is a politics based on morals has not been developed to respond to that threat coming from Russia.
I know that you're writing on a new book on the topic Putin again, and I've heard that you are exploring how the former ideal of the Homo Sovieticus is now being transformed and used again, but in another manner. Could you please tell us about?
It's actually
reveal a little bit about what you're.
Right. So one of the things that I have found very useful is this concept of Homo Sovieticus, which, of course, it's a concept that was transformed many times over the course of the 20th century. Initially, the Bolshevik regime was supposed to produce the new man, and that was an ideal. By the end of the Soviet Union, what we were talking about was Homo Sovieticus in the sense of a better known Western term as the totalitarian personality. And there's some argument about whether totalitarian personality exists at all. A lot of Central Europeans reject the idea out of hand and find it quite insulting. But I think that there are certain traits that totalitarian regimes force upon people, that breed in people, that express themselves through things like the 86% approval ratings, which I mentioned earlier. And those are very useful to look at. And what I'm looking at is the restoration of totalitarian mechanisms.
Okay. So, your last book was about Pussy Riot and the struggle they had. Could you just shortly say what happened after they was released from prison? Because the news reporting actually disappeared around them.
Really? That's really interesting, because they've been very well covered in the States. They're amazing. They came out of prison with the goal of starting a prisoners' rights organization, which they've been able to do. Their idea initially was to, and we're talking about the two women who served almost the entirety of their 2-year sentences, so Masha and Nadia. They wanted to create an organization that would work for prison reform and also work on behalf of individual inmates. I think at this point it's clear that no kind of reform can occur in Russia without regime change. But so the model of what they're doing in some ways is similar to the model on which dissidents and human rights activists in the Soviet Union worked, which is basically defending individuals. But they have been able to set up an organization that gets information from within prison colonies on violations, and then is able to mobilize people to confront those violations. You know, they get hundreds and thousands of people to call a prison colony and ask about a particular inmate. That saves a life. You know, that's if that inmate is being abused or is being, you know, held in solitary illegally. Drawing public attention to that particular person will actually save a person's life. They've also started a website called Media Zone, which is, and their organization is called Justice Zone. And they've been documenting court cases and prison abuses. So I think they've been doing a terrific job.
Yeah, and the artistic part of the Pussy Riot movement, is that still alive?
They've done a few things over the last couple of years. I don't know that that's the focus of their lives anymore. I think they've really sort of been transformed into human rights activists.
Okay. We are really looking forward to your next book.
Thank you
so much for coming to Expressen, Masha Gessen.
Thank you.
Thank you.